Well, good day, everyone. It's Cameron Smith here from Portland State University, where I teach human evolution and prehistory. And I also am co-director of the Center for Human Space Exploration at the University of Arizona's Biosphere 2 in Tucson. And what I'd like to chat with you a little bit today, unfortunately, it's one way. I'm traveling today, so I just had to record this video. So next time, sometime, hopefully we can chat back and forth. But what I wanted to do is introduce to you a little bit about how this field of anthropology can assist us in the mind-boggling conception of interstellar voyaging on a multi-generational timescale by large populations of humans. That is, traveling to settle on exoplanets, essentially, around other stars, a different solar system. And I'll tell you a little bit about what anthropology is, how it works, and then I think that will start to shape up how it can assist in that sort of project. Now, the world of anthropology is the study of humanity, and it quickly became clear in the history of anthropological study that we are what's called a biocultural species. We evolve and adapt and survive both biologically because of our biological constitution. We have adaptations for high altitudes and for cold temperatures and so on. But we also evolve and adapt and survive by cultural adaptation. That is, we use cultural information, for example, instructions that you learn as a young person, let's say in the high Arctic, you learn how to build a snow house or how to build the tools for hunting sea mammals, that sort of thing. So we also have cultural evolution and cultural adaptation. Once anthropology, taking about a century to sort of get its feet and get its theoretical underpinning settled, and it's, of course, few approaches to scientific inquiry are entirely settled. There are always new questions coming up. But one of the most productive, in my opinion, one of the most productive approaches to the anthropological investigation of humanity, our biocultural evolution, has been a systematic understanding of culture, that major adaptive mechanism, as a complex adaptive system. So there's a whole body of theory you may have heard of about complex adaptive systems, and it decomposes systems. It could be an organism, it could be a company, it could be a human culture, into a large number of agents, which are the population of people, the interactions among those agents, and the rule system by which the interactions are carried out. And then there is consideration of the bringing in of energy and matter and information into the system. Again, it could be a bacterium or it could be an entire human culture. This systematic approach, understanding cultures as complex adaptive systems, is particularly important for understanding our how anthropology applies here. So the conception is this mind-boggling conception that I started with in 2013 with Andreas Hein of the Icarus Interstellar project. I was asked to sort of consider the biological population issues, the issues of biological evolution on multi-generational voyaging, and what would we require? What would be required to make that a success? How many people? This directly influenced, of course, the design of the ship, of the vessel, to keep that many people alive for some centuries and so on. Now, since that time, I did do a bit of work on the populations, but other more capable people actually took what I sort of resurrected. There was some interest of this in the 70s. Then I sort of did some studies around 2014, 15. But then Friederike Marin at University of Strasbourg actually sort of followed up on that and improved sort of what I was starting. So the understanding of the biological issues of the number of people and the sort of mutation and sort of biological change that you would have over time, I think that's very, very well in hand. I have diverged further into understanding the cultural dynamics. And so over time, culture changes, culture, just as biology, changes oftentimes in an equilibrating way. So a cultural complex adaptive system is a set of rules and a set of ways of bringing in information and matter and energy into the system of human beings living together to equilibrate against essentially perturbances to the system, such that you might have an environmental change and you need to adjust to that change. It gets warmer or it gets cooler, less rainfall, more rainfall. We don't just pick up and run. We invent new tools. We invent new cultural rules. We invent traditions. Okay, we will serve less food. We will use less water. We'll be more conservative, that sort of thing. If we consider human culture as this complex adaptive system, how does anthropology help us understand how it's going to work in this conception of interstellar voyaging? Well, largely it has to do with the dynamics of how cultures change, and how do you take that apart or understand that? Well, there's a structural approach that is largely comparative. It begins in the 40s and 50s, and with early attempts in anthropology to understand this systematic approach to cultures as systems. And so, for example, here there were early fleshing out of all of the components of a cultural system by, for example, Murdoch and so on, that resulted in databases of the properties of human cultures, and trying to look out, or trying to compare cultural traits and almost sort of classify them in an evolutionary approach. This has been very useful. It doesn't tell you everything. It only tells you some things that we want to know, but it's been very useful. For example, here's a very well-regarded standardized approach to what civilizations are. And civilization is one variety of complex adaptive system in humanity. Hunting and gathering is another variety. Horticultural, small-scale farming is another variety. These are subsistence modes. And the agricultural subsistence mode of farming that supports or underpins civilizations is well understood in a conception of its individual elements and how they interact in the complex adaptive system. So it has been very productive. Again, it doesn't tell you everything, and there are pitfalls to the comparative approach, but it's useful. Taking that model, that understanding, what my approach has been in a number of publications, for example, Principles of Space Anthropology. I'm not doing this just to be self-promotional, showing you where the information is if you're interested. Principles of Space Anthropology, it's at a lot of libraries. In that, I am doing this approach. I'm looking at the individual elements of a culture as a complex adaptive system and sort of saying, well, how do those change? What do we know about the dynamics that change through time in those sorts of systems? That book, Principles of Space Anthropology, by the way, is analogous to this. This is Principles of Bioastronautics, written by Siegfried Geratewohl in 1963, or published in 63. And this was my model for Principles of Space Anthropology. They were just sketching out the physiological issues of human beings in a space environment or beyond Earth environment. In the same way here, I'm sketching these out. But you might, if you're interested in this, this is perhaps a good start. They're also referenced in here a lot of other works. I've also written a little bit more about this in a chapter here in Interstellar Travel, this volume and a second volume written by or edited by Les Johnson and Kenneth Roy. And in those, I'm delving further into this, looking a little bit more closely at some of the details of how these things change. Let me give you an example. All cultures, so if we're thinking about these cultures as homeostatic adaptive systems that keep cultural equilibrium in the face of perturbations, troubles, pressures that come along. How do they do that? Well, all cultures have, for example, a system of family. Now it differs. The most unifying element of a family is a cohabiting group. Oftentimes it's a married pair with some offspring. Sometimes it's a married woman with multiple husbands. Sometimes it's a husband with multiple wives. Sometimes only the first generation live with the parents, and other ones have to go away, or they move away very quickly. Other ones, a lot of people stay together, and elders may reside there as well. The size, the shape, the composition of numbers of people and so on in that population, there's the end of my timer, just running out of time. I'll go on a little bit longer. The population of the family unit, the constitution of the family unit, can be adjusted and is adjusted by human beings worldwide to accommodate the requirements and their resources, such that in some populations you have a large, in traditional Germany, you would have a Hof, a big house, and a multi-generational family living inside. Other people are highly mobile, move around, and they have small populations that are cohabitate, and they move around in much smaller populations. And the size and the nature of the population that constitutes the family group is that determines, right, the scale of the bringing in of matter and information and energy. Family system like that I've just described, the family system is one of, let's say, 12 to maybe 20, depends on the author, what I call cultural universals or human universals. That is, all cultures have some conception of a family, and we can look at the range of family organizations and start to see how those map onto different environments and different adaptations to certain conditions. It's not just mapping onto the material environment and the resources that are there. There are historical things that come in and alter cultural universals, but they're also scaled and shaped by physical pressures that they have to accommodate. The point being, I've oftentimes in many publications listed essentially the cultural universals, language, a cuisine, essentially a set of conceptions of what is appropriate to eat, what can be eaten, how to prepare it on different occasions, all of those things, artistic traditions, all of those things. Each culture has their own conceptions of these. And you add them all up, and this is essentially, you look at the shapes of each of these or the configuration of each of these in a given culture, and that's the shape and feel of that culture. Japanese traditional versus, let's say, Australian traditional. You get the idea. You might think, well, what does that matter? You know, what the art changes a little bit, or the cuisine changes a little bit, or the music changes a little bit, or something like that through time. Well, why does it matter? Well, because when you pile all that together, that's a human culture, and it's cultural. It's human culture that's going to change, I think, much more over time as we go to exoplanets and other solar systems, much more so than our biology. There will be biological change, but the cultural change will be much more noticeable, I think. And final thing I'd like to say about this is consider the time dimension of interstellar voyaging, which I've done a lot. I've started to divide up my thought space here into 3 ages. The departure age, or the age of departure, where for several generations, the people on the way to this interstellar destination, they have some connection with Earth. They know people that perhaps somebody who was born on Earth is still on the vessel. Then there's an interstellar age where they have no connection with Earth, because they've out a century or two, let's say, and everybody has passed away who was on the voyage beginning with Earth. And interestingly, they will have no connection to the destination. They will perish before reaching the destination on, let's say, a 500 year journey. And then there is an arrival age, let's say, and the arrival age has new concerns. They have a new conception of planetness. They've been inside this vehicle for a long time, and now you have the conception of a planet. This would be almost alien to people. They've only known of planets by looking in books and thinking about history and looking at videos of Earth where there was a planet. So what are the concerns and the perturbations to cultural equilibrium that'll come up in these different ages? These are the ways that I'm structuring my thoughtscape of human biocultural evolution on interstellar voyaging. The reason I did this, I was really fascinated by this whole conception of humans exploring their universe, and I had learned a lot about it about human change through time in my studies of anthropology. Those were largely studies of the past, and I wanted to see what I could do to contribute to considering human change through the future on this kind of voyage. And what I found was that during discussions of this, and I'll just wrap up now, during the discussions of this, I would often find that people had very personal conceptions of what they wanted the culture to look like. It should be a Buddhist culture. It should be a Roman Catholic culture. It should be an Amish culture. We should use that as the model of what we want to, project. Well, those into the stars, and maybe those are all fine. But I wanted to be rather more systematic about it. And that's why I use the tools of understanding cultures as complex adaptive systems, and not think about what I would favor or what I think is the best system. I wanted to think a little bit more systematically about, predicting, not so much predicting what is going to happen, but giving ourselves a better understanding of our adaptive tools, our cultural adaptive toolkit. The better we understand that, the better we understand how to maintain equilibrium and keep the biocultural health of populations stable over the multi-generational timescale. There's one diagram, I've put it on LinkedIn at one point, that guides a lot of this, and it essentially breaks down the human life cycle into its biocultural elements, or just sketches out some of these bioculturally. That is, through the course of life of a human being, there are about 8 major stages, 8 major periods. And some of them, it's very important that biological things are happening, and in some of them, it's more important that cultural things are happening to maintain the good health. So this is the structure that I'm trying to bring to that discussion. Well, I've gone for 15, 16 minutes, almost 17, so I'm going to stop now. Thanks very much for the invitation to chat today, and I hope this is of interest to you, and hopefully next time I can speak with you live. Thank you.